Moving on to the joint capsules, or joint mobilizations, if you will. These nerves just don't go to the muscles and the tendons and the fascia and the skin, they go to the joint capsules as well. Synovial membranes, joint capsules, ligaments are closely associated with the joints as well. So we're going to load these holding structures of the joints. We go to end range and load them and stretch the nerves, or we can apply a force in mid-range somewhere and apply a force to the joint capsule at that point. For example, I can go to extreme external rotation, and there's some force on the joint, or I can go halfway in external rotation and apply some traction. That's going to load the joint as well, the joint capsule as well. So you can see there's many, many different positions where you can load that joint capsule or load the holding elements around the joint. Now here's the hip joint. We'll look at the hip. Now I'm not a full flexion, I'm just somewhat flexion. External rotation, traction. Internal rotation, traction. I can throw some abduction in it. Abduction, some flexion, external rotation, traction. Internal rotation, traction. Same thing I can do with the knee bent. More flexion in the knee. External rotation, traction. External rotation to full range, traction. Internal rotation, traction. Flexion, abduction. External rotation, traction. Flexion, abduction, internal rotation, traction. Full abduction, no flexion. Internal rotation, traction. External rotation, traction. Maybe a little bit of flexion, full abduction. External rotation, traction. Internal rotation, traction. Slide over. Still on the same hip joint, some extension now. Extension, abduction, external rotation, traction. Abduction, extension, internal rotation, traction. So I can apply these various positions. I can put a force in these various positions. And if a person does have hip pain, let's suppose they have degenerative arthritis, or suppose they have an old hip fracture, dislocated a hip at one time, one of these positions will be particularly sore and particularly beneficial. Moving on to the shoulder, mobilization of the shoulder. External rotation, some elevation, external rotation, traction. Internal rotation, traction. No rotation, traction. Try it with some adduction down here. External rotation, traction. External rotation, traction. I might want to load the shoulder in the posterior direction, like this, and traction. Superior direction, traction. Might want to elevate the shoulder a little bit more. Flex it. Internal rotation, traction. External rotation, traction. More flexion. Maybe let me cross over. Internal rotation, traction. External rotation, traction. That's moving through the full range of movement of that joint capsule. I demonstrated the hip, I demonstrated the shoulder. Same that applies for the fingers, the toes, the elbow, wrists, ankles, knees.